Hey everyone. So today's guest is Blanka Šupe, a serial entrepreneur and founder of Haos Community Space, a co-working space in Belgrade, Serbia, or as she likes to call it, a co-experiencing space. Now, Blanka's unique background, living between Russia, the United States, and Serbia, and also her extensive experience in building companies, shows us how a citizen of the world can do best for themselves, their family, their community, and their business. Now, we've talked about plenty of things ranging from her life between the three countries that I've mentioned, also what is the process of building the companies themselves and how the process differs from, San Francisco and the Silicon Valley and Belgrade, Serbia. We've also talked about how she takes care of her mental health and what the future holds for Haos Community Space. Now, I'm going to leave a link below to the co-working space, of course, that she founded, so you guys can check it out. And keep in mind that she's opening a new space at the end of May. The episode, of course, is different since we have the conversation in English, and we'll get into why that is in the conversation. But I also want kind of to note that, ever since I started this project, I did want to do it in English. Not because I don't feel comfortable or don't want to do it in Serbian. It's just simply a matter of my preference and what I would like to do moving forward. So this is not a one-time thing. I will have more conversations in English as I will be traveling to the US and speaking with a lot of interesting and amazing people. So, without further ado, my name is Vuk Baletic. This is Kensho Talks, and now Blanka Šupe. Enjoy.
But I feel like it's also every language has its own I don't know if you've noticed that, but I definitely noticed that I'm very different in different languages.
That was going to be my first question.
Oh, God.
So
let's
get into it. Let's get into it right away, actually. So to that point, that was literally going to be my first question. So how did you handle throughout life when you were moving around, living as a digital nomad, living in Russia first, living in San Francisco in the US for 10 years? So it's almost like a fractured identity, meaning, I've had a similar kind of road. I mean, I haven't been to Russia at all, but in terms of the US and moving there, it's almost as if you are two different people or three or four different people in some capacity. So how have you handled that in your life, and how has that helped you, or maybe was even a detriment in some cases?
I mean, that's a very good question. I often talk a lot about this with friends because I feel that way, but a lot of my friends who speak, different languages don't feel always that way. And I think it has something to do with how early on you've learned that language and how comfortable you feel in it. Like, I make mistakes actually in all three languages.
Right.
Let's just be clear. But I started learning English when I was 3 years, and I started speaking Serbian and Russian at the same time. So I do feel like I consider myself trilingual, and therefore I think, I dream, I cannot tune that language out. So like if I hear English somewhere, I always understand what people are saying. So that's why it is a bit part of my identity. Whereas I think for a lot of people, when they've learned language later on in life, it doesn't become as much of their own identity. That's so far my theory on this. But for me, I've noticed, and it's also like, obviously I've spent my childhood in Russia, and I was speaking mostly Russian.
Right.
And in my family, obviously we spoke Serbian. But that also that's how my identity is developed. So like in Russian, I feel very confident, but I think I am sort of, it's not that it's stuck, but it's in that identity of like school, university. I feel very maybe strict. I don't know, somehow part of the language is that way, but also I think at which parts I've used it the most. Whereas English has always been slightly different. I've used it when I traveled. I used it when I moved to the US, in California, when everyone's like much more friendly. And my personality in English is much more outgoing. It's, I think, much more fun in a lot of ways, much more loud. And then the Serbian mentality, it was for a while stuck talking only with my parents. So I feel like I end up being like a child when I speak Serbian.
I know exactly what you're saying.
And that's why maybe it's also what I was saying, that I don't feel as comfortable sometimes, because I'm a grown person. I want to talk about my work, and yet I feel like I don't have enough words also to describe it from a professional standpoint, but also it's the language I'm used to speaking with my parents. I'm not used to using it for work as much. But I do think it can change. So it's not that that personality is stuck forever. I think the more you use that language in a professional environment or end up, using it with friends, I already noticed that I'm starting to use some new words and idioms that I haven't used in the past now, because I have friends who are Serbian here. So I think that as any personality, it evolves depending on how you use the language. But to answer your question, whether that was an advantage or disadvantage, I definitely consider that to be an advantage. Generally, I think the more languages you speak, the more you travel, and the more you're exposed to different parts of your own personality, you end up being much more flexible. If anything, at least that you become more open and flexible to people being different, to people not, because you're like, if you're three different people, then you're obviously much more open to somebody else being different.
Exactly. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I feel the exact same way. I left much later than you. I left in high school.
Yeah.
But still, all my formative years, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, I've grown to be myself in the U.S. Yeah. And then when I came back here in 2019, people were like, "Oh, Vuk, Chevu, you're supposed to be this guy."
Yes.
And they're opposed to seeing it's kind of the Serbian mentality as well. I don't know if you agree. Yes. It's like they want to look at you through the lens of what they think you should be. And then they're stuck with that image until they actually realize, oh, you're actually a different person now.
And it's very hard for them to be like, why don't you fit in that one box? But I think that's also very human. In Serbia specifically, I've noticed that people want to kind of put you in a certain box. I think it has something to do with how many people, traveled outside, how many foreigners come here. I feel like it will change the more Serbia becomes like more, let's say, international. But I also noticed, and I have a thing that generally wherever I go, except the US, people really want to be like, okay, are you Serbian? Are you Russian? Are you an American? Because I have an American citizenship. Right. I'm half Croatian, half Serbian. I lived in Russia. And it's like they constantly want to find something in your behavior that's going to tell them you're this person. And I think it's a very human thing. But in Serbia, it's just a little bit correct to the max in a way.
You're so right. I mean, you're an amalgamation of all of those things, and not just one of the check boxes. So on that note, I mean, let's just a little bit dive into your work currently and how Haos Community came to be. Because of that, all of the connection to your home and your home in Russia and everything that transpired because of the war. So how did that all begin? And what is Haos, if you can just give a little bit of background?
So Haos is first and foremost a community for startups, founders, and any type of, I would say, creator, and entrepreneur. But it's has a physical component, so it has a community space or coworking. I don't really like to call it coworking; it's more a community space for me, where we use that as a platform for that community to thrive. And obviously, we put a lot of events, social, professional, things like that. But the idea is to have sort of an offline community for startups and founders globally. But right now we're in Serbia. And the question on how it started, obviously I have no experience really with offline businesses, co-working whatsoever. I was a marketer for a while. Then I worked in tech in the US. Then I was a founder of a startup in the US as well. And after that, at the moment where I decided to move from the US to Serbia, I was a CMO of one early stage startup and an advisor for 3 or 4 different startups at that time. And I really wasn't planning on living in Serbia, and I wasn't really planning on starting a business here. But it just kind of life happened. And I was here during Corona, ended up staying a bit longer. And at the moment where I decided, well, maybe I should just go and now finally be the digital nomad I want to be, or I thought I want to be. I want to figure out where I want to live. I was here, and the war started in Ukraine. And obviously a lot of startups I worked with and advised at that time, and the startup I was CMO at, they were kind of like escaping Russia at that time. A lot of the teams that were there, they were Russian. And they actually ended up in Serbia because they knew me. I was saying, like, why are you going to Armenia or Turkey? You can come to Serbia. You don't need a visa. And I had a bunch of people living in my apartment. I have a big apartment in Belgrade, and my living room was turned into a basically co-living, co-working space. And it was like a joke of like, let's maybe do a co-working space. Now, when I think back, of course, there were a lot of things in my life that sort of brought me to maybe wanting to do something like this. There were a lot of times I wanted to do an offline business. A lot of the times I wanted to do like accelerators, different things for startups in Serbia. But back then it felt like, oh, let's just, maybe I'll just do this. And very quickly after that, from sort of the idea to actually opening, there was only like 2.5, 3 months that passed. So it kind of, I didn't even have a chance to really think through what my decision was.
Right.
But that's kind of the moment how it actually started. But I would say there are a lot of different things that brought me in the end to be like confident I want to do it. But back then I wasn't thinking, I was just like, I want to do this.
So let's dive into that a little bit in the sense of, people talk about, some people talk about startups and starting a business as this albatross of, but why would I relinquish my security and my salary and a comfortable job to go and start something, to use my own money, to use someone else's money? Can you just walk me through, for example, for Haos, you don't need to, or maybe for any of your tech firms, how does that process actually look like? Whether you're, self-funded, working with an accelerator, how does that actually grow or begin to grow?
It's a very good question. And honestly, I do think that it depends on your personal, also kind of internal thing. I've never really thought of it, I'm relinquishing my security. To be honest, I never had that struggle. Because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. Yeah. Both of my parents are entrepreneurs. And so in my head, I always knew that eventually I'll have my own business. And I never thought it was going to be a tech startup first. That wasn't the plan. But something like an offline business, I did want to do eventually. So I think that it depends on the person. For me specifically, when I have an idea and I'm convinced that I need to do this and I really want to do this, I'm very quick to act. I'm not one of those people who spends a lot of time, calculating all the risks. I mean, ideating, yes, but typically I know already, like, instantly things fall into place. Because I really believe that when something is right, it comes easy. The more you try to push and force things, to me, that's a bad signal. Like, I've learned that in my life. Like, when I was younger, I used to try and force things, and I was known for getting shit done, Yeah. But now I know that if it feels right, things are going to fall into place. Like, I'm gonna figure it out. And actually, with both my startup in the US and with Haos, I don't know, like, the moment I started talking about the idea, I found people who would fund it super easy. I don't know, like, in the first case, I don't know if you know that story, but in my first startup in the US, I wasn't even thinking about starting a startup, but my friend who was my first manager. He sold his business, and he literally wrote me an email and was like, do you want to be a CEO? Yeah. And I was like, it could be a good idea right now. Maybe it wasn't, but so I didn't even have this thing of like, oh, should I not? I just kind of dived into it. With Haos, it was similar. Like I started talking about it, and there were so many people who were like, okay, that's a great idea. Let's do it. You know, when are you opening the coworking? And I was like, oh, well, now I guess I have to actually do it. And I think seriously about it. So I don't know. I know a lot of people ask me, how did you decided to go and do a business that's so big, even though I don't think that Haos is that, like there's certain things that people ask me, but I think they're seeing it through their own sort of fears and maybe issues that they're identifying. I wasn't really thinking, like, if I decide I want to do this and I need to do this, I don't have that much time that I spend on sort of dwelling on like whether or not I should do it.
No, it's a great point that you brought up in terms of forcing things. As long as it's seamless to a point where the roadblocks are easy enough to go over at the beginning, at least, then you know that you're on the right path.
Yes.
But usually when I speak with, and I think it's also about the Serbian mentality as well a little bit. It's like, I speak with a lot of my close friends and I tell them, you're so talented, you're so smart, you should do your own thing. Like you have the capacity to do it. But they're like, oh, but I don't even know what equity is. I'm used to myself, and that's it's changing, to be honest. Like I'm seeing a lot of people now, especially with the likes of Microsoft coming in and huge tech companies giving equity to their developers and employees. But I think there's a tide shift. I think people are starting to realize that having skin in the game is a lot better in the long run, but it's also more satisfactory to the person.
Well, there are two things I want to say to this. Mm-hmm. One is, I don't think that everyone should be an entrepreneur. I don't think everyone is cut. And I think it's very dangerous also that there is a big push here, for example, where like, people should start startups and stuff. And I do see people who are not entrepreneurial, or they're not entrepreneurial yet. Maybe they are not ready for that level of responsibility, that amount of stress, and taking responsibility not just for yourself but for a lot of people you're going to employ, and not everyone really enjoys it actually. So that's one thing. The other thing is that with Serbia, I feel like the problem here is there's not enough examples of that successful like entrepreneurship. Like if you think about the US, the idea of having your own business is something that's like almost from the moment US was created. You have this individual American dream of like, everything is possible, you can build your own future, these types of things, and you feel a lot in the way people think about it is different because they have generations and generations of people who were entrepreneurs in their family. I think in Serbia it's slightly different, and as any sort of ex-communist country,
exactly
slightly different. And people are like, how easily people think of like, let's open a coffee shop here or a cafe. Mostly because they have a lot of experience of people opening that kind of small business. But when you think about tech business or something that's different, to them it seems scary because they see only like really big companies doing it, or people only somewhere else, like in the US, doing this startups. So I think that there's those two things that they need to understand whether or not they're really cut out for it. And the second thing is to try and find the role model for yourself that that you're sort of inspired by, I guess.
No, I absolutely agree with what you said. I'm thinking, there's a lot of also, it's interesting to see how the trends are laid here. It's almost like a 2 to 3 year delay where people are just trying to, those grifters, I would call them, that are like hustle, grind, do this, do that, take my course and all that. It's also up and coming here now, but we've gone over that cycle in the US. But how do you see, this exponential? It's almost like I was talking about this with my friend. It's like we're in the last stage of gentrification of Belgrade, in a sense of there's a ton of immigration. The rents have skyrocketed, and we have Serbians living in Serbia speaking English, and I'm like, this is the pinnacle.
Yes,
like it's like this is the pinnacle. Like where do we? So where do you see this exponential growth, and also within your company, like having all of these founders and having all of these companies? How do you see that progressing? And I know that you're also in some capacity serving as a bridge between the Silicon Valley and Belgrade. So how do you see your role in kind of pushing the scene forward? I mean, I know it's kind of a big question, it's a big question.
And it is a big question. I do believe in like small things matter, and like I try not to think of that like big ambitious goal that I have. Definitely, when I started this, I thought I am, of course, I felt like I'm the only person that can do this, not because I lived in the US or I'm Serbian, but because of all three things. Like I am connected to the Russian community, I'm connected to the Silicon Valley community, and I am starting to be connected much more with the community here, but I am from here. And I think it is important that some of these things that are changing need to come from people who are actually Serbian, people who are here. I'm not a big fan of just like somebody coming and being like, do this. So it is an ambitious goal, but I think that every small thing matters. So every event that we put together, like we brought in founder of the unicorn startup Miro here, and we had a fireside chat with him. And even though there were like maybe like 60 people in the audience, because that was the maximum we could have in our space, I know that things changed for a lot of people in the audience, like hearing those things from him. Having him actually even come there was a big deal. So, and then we had like more recently an event on women in tech in Serbia, and I felt the enthusiasm, and I felt like people were saying, "Oh my God, thank God we're having these types of events where we can talk about some of the issues and some of the things that are sort of on the mind for people here." So, I see my role as, yes, trying to connect the three things, but also trying to do things differently, to show that things can be done differently. Same way that I see that the Russian community that came here is changing already a lot of the mentality for at least people in Belgrade, for sure. Like, I actually just recently heard how people are like trying to open businesses quicker. Now they're seeing that Russians are able to come, they don't know the language, and they're able to open a business within a few months. They're much more, they feel more inspired by it. So I think that showing that, you can open different types of businesses than like 130th cafe that looks exactly the same, has the same food and all these things, that you can do things with a different perspective. I think it is something that I try to do on an everyday basis. So like whenever I think of kind of the events we do, or how we set up things in-house, how we communicate, how we do marketing, trying to show that there's a different way of doing things and get people maybe excited and interested in trying to explore that. I guess that's sort of something that I can say like I am actively doing on an everyday basis. Bigger things, I try not to think as much, because then it can get very scary, I guess, or intimidating.
I mean, you're doing an amazing job. Like when I was looking for co-working spaces, you came up on the SEO, like search engine optimization. You were the first ones. And considering it was invite only, and then looking at other spots, I'm like, this looks incredible. It's completely new. It's completely different. So really great to see. So there's two things that I wanted to touch on there, what you were saying just now. So first one, considering growth of your own company, you're opening up a new space in Art House, I believe in Silosi.
Art Class, so it's next to Silosi, yes.
Art Class. So what is the goal for that place?
Well, there are a few things. So obviously, actually, I started thinking about a second location 3 months in after we opened the first one. So we opened September 2022, and we were sold out full with a huge wait list within the first month. So for us, we were like, maybe we should have taken another floor in our building, which was an option then, but we didn't go for it. And we then started talking with the founder of Silesia, Anastasia. And she was like, this would be a perfect spot for you. And then I went and I was like, well, this is going to be the new, art cluster. This is where everything will be in a few years. So I was like, we need to be there. So I fell in love with the location and sort of the energy of that place. And I could see it. So for me, it was like, it was not done yet. It wasn't renovated yet. So we started thinking about just expanding. But while we were then growing as a business, I realized that one of the things I really want to do is the accelerator, on-demand accelerator for startups. So that's one of the things that this place will be able to offer us, just because it's bigger, it's done a little bit different. And so the purpose for us is just to expand our community, to make sure we can offer more support for startups and, from everything, from more events to the accelerator to actually being in that sort of art cluster in a different sort of environment than we're in right now. And also, for me personally, there is another goal is to see how to manage 2 co-workings at the same time, because I do want to expand out to different cities, to region and globally. So I want to first try it, like if I can manage it efficiently in one city, then maybe I can start expanding.
Going global.
Yes.
Can you explain what does an accelerator entail and what does that actually mean?
So, I mean, the way I want to do it, obviously not the way it's, there are a lot of different ways you can do it. Basically, when I was a founder of a startup, I was part of this sort of similar on-demand accelerator. I was in a Twitter building in San Francisco.
Runaway, right?
Yeah, Runaway,
yeah.
Yes. And it offered sort of community support, but it also offered like on-demand office hours with different mentors and experts, and a bunch of different like events that were for the community back then. But I realized that peer-to-peer type of mentorship is the most beneficial. In addition, there are things like, of course, finance, accounting, different things that usually as a first-time founder, you don't really know. So my goal is really to provide the support where you are not just listening, you don't have just a boot camp where you're supposed to cram all this knowledge, even though it might not fit into at the stage of the startup that you're in, but to basically have, you, for example, take a year and you're trying to, by the end of the year, to get to a product market fit, to take you through different stages and offer you support at the right time with connecting you, with other founders or specific experts in a certain field, rather than saying that in 3 months' time you're like gonna learn everything that you need to know about the startup and then you're off you go and you already raised money. I don't think that that's how it really works. Typically accelerators are efficient in this way where you have a specific goal. I want to raise money or I want to get connections, but I actually want to help people get to a point of understanding whether they have product market fit, how they can scale that afterwards, how they can grow their business, and do that with people who've already done it rather than connect to people who are just focused on doing marketing in a huge corporation, or they work with startups, but they've never had a startup themselves.
They've never had a startup. Thank you for the explanation. I think it serves well, when we use these terminologies that people don't understand, it's really good to get an explanation. So to go back to your previous point and regarding Haos and regarding growth. So how do you view this huge influx of specifically, Russian immigrants and the like? I mean, I've met a ton of people. I have a ton of friends now that are Russian, which I haven't had before. And, in some cases, they are similar to us, but in a lot of cases they are, the northern versus southern kind of mentality, right? Where they're a little bit more closed off. They're focused on their own community that they build out within their own language, within their own space. So how do you view that migration from them coming to Serbia?
Yeah. So there are, again, different things here. So first, what you've mentioned about them being sort of closed.
Some of them, not obviously generalizing, like some of them being.
But that there is a truth to that. But I would say that whenever you have such a sudden sort of immigration of people, it tends to happen because if you think about it, these people, it's not like one-off, I know, some engineer who was like, oh, I want to move to Serbia. It's mostly people who never thought they were going to move. They're escaping a war. They're escaping having to go to war. And they are in a new place where they're for the first 1 or 2 years of any immigration, like speaking from experience, you tend to try to find all the familiar things. You're trying to suddenly you decide you really love, Russian food or like home food, and you're constantly going to the same place, and you end up looking for people who are similar. So I think that's part of it is normal, and I think that it happens the same way for people for different countries. And in Serbian community, like in the US, also tends to, depending on different periods, but those people who immigrated during the wartime, they also are very, very closed.
Exactly.
So that's one part. The other part is, I think that the Russians that moved to Serbia, especially the younger ones, are a lot more open and a lot more warm than your typical Russian. So there is definitely truth to the northern southern mentality. It's a bit more complex. Like I can go on and talk a lot about this because I think the Russians generally, it's a big country. There's historical reasons. There's also the fact that part of it is a lot of Asian actually influence on the culture. I don't think that Russians are as European as we believe, or even Europeans believe, because they look European, but a lot of ways there are things that are very different. And I always end up saying that I think that Americans and Russians are much more similar than Europeans and Russians, and definitely than Serbians and Russians. So there is some similarities, but it is very different. But I would say that the people that have moved here, they are much more open to the new culture, that they're trying to integrate much more than, let's say, Russians who moved, like after the Soviet Union. There are a lot of people who moved and they never really learned language. There's a bunch of people in Germany who didn't really care about integrating. Here, I see the different kind of immigration, and I'm very happy to see it because most of them are trying to the best that they can right now to integrate, and that's cool to me.
Yeah, it's important to assimilate. And also to your point, I've noticed, and I know you've spent some time in Argentina, which I would love to hear about. Like, I've noticed that actually Serbians, in terms of their temperament, in terms of their just jolliness and emotional aspects, are a lot closer to South Americans than to Russians. Because I've done a little bit of traveling there. I've never lived there, but I really connect well with the Spanish. I really connect well with Colombia. I mean, whichever people from those regions I meet, they're always so similar from an emotional standpoint.
Yes, I would say the difference that I've noticed, and again, I also have a lot of friends from Southern America. I would say that they generally have a much more positive outlook on life.
Exactly.
That's one difference. So everything else you said, yes, it's kind of, it's a combination of directness but warmth. Because like, Scandinavian people are really direct, but sort of in a more not rude way, but like cooler way. Whereas Serbians are really friendly, really welcoming, very warm. But one thing that does bother me now that I've lived here is that it feels like people expect bad things to happen, and they're kind of like to complain about them. So like Latin Americans are very they don't complain as much about their life. I would notice. I feel like it's interesting to me that they've had hardship, and a lot of these countries in Latin America are not very rich. But they still have a more positive sort of outlook, or at least they're like looking at it from a funny perspective somehow. And I like that a lot, because it's not a fake positivity. It's just generally they focus on other things, I guess, or try to focus on other things. They're good.
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of also like socio-political and economical differences in the U.S. People don't complain as much in that capacity, but they're also extremely focused on their view on specific issues, and they won't budge in some cases, because if this is black, then I'm going to view it as black always, when it can be gray. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of nuance there. But what I wanted to ask you is, my parents, especially my dad actually loved that I came back. But my mom is like, oh my God, you should have never came back. Why are you here?
Same.
Oh, leave. And every time I spend time with her, she's like, leave. And I'm so glad to have met, not just you, but a ton of people that have moved back and have built out companies and have, created a life for themselves here. So why Belgrade? How did that end up being the spot where, you've traveled, you've been a digital nomad from Argentina to Berlin, from what I understood, to Belgrade. So how did this come to be, and how did your family and your closest ones view it?
I mean, very similar, actually. It's funny that you say this. Like I think my mom specifically was sad that when we lived in Russia, she was like, you're going to go study in the US or somewhere, like with me and my sister. Even then she didn't want us to live in Russia either. She was like, you're going to live somewhere else. And it was, in my head, I was going to live somewhere else. And my mom loved San Francisco more than I did, and she always was coming there. She still is not over the fact that I'm no longer living there. I think my dad was sort of, he missed me more than he missed my mom, but my dad is like, oh, it's great that the whole family is like in one place somehow. But both of my parents were very worried that I ended up being here, because they didn't know what I was going to do. They were still living in this old world where, if you live here, you can only find job opportunities here. And
exactly,
it is true that Serbia is not the best country to choose from a career standpoint, right? But I think that now they've changed their mind, because they were very shocked and surprised of how successful Haos is and how much I enjoy doing it, and I see that they're no longer ever mentioning to me that I should leave. But for me, it was never a choice. Like, I would love to say that I was like, oh, I'm gonna live in Serbia. I recently found my diary from like when I was 20 years old, just before I moved to the US, where I wrote something. I said like, I've decided after the US, I'm gonna live in Serbia. I don't remember this.
Interesting.
I wrote this down, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when I was living in the US, I wanted to go back to Europe. I didn't feel as happy in San Francisco in a lot of ways. Now I know why, besides other topics around San Francisco specifically. But it was hard to like put down roots. Like it was every 2 or 3 years, my group of friends would change because people would move and leave. And now I realize how important the community is, and how important it is to feel like you have not just like people you can go out for a drink with, but actually rely on, and how important it is that you feel that this city is your city. Because for me, now I walk in Belgrade, and everywhere I go, I see people I know and I'm friends with, and it just makes me feel like I'm living in, here for all of my life, which is crazy. I never had this before. And I decided I was gonna move from the US in 2020, and I moved here just when Corona started. And my idea was I was gonna live in Berlin, I was gonna live in London a little bit, travel, and decide where I was gonna stay. And I went to Berlin, but everything closed down. And I decided, okay, I'm not going to be in Berlin. I came back here. And then something weird happened. I kept traveling around, but I was coming back to Belgrade and I considered it my hub. And then the more I thought about it, I realized I don't actually have a reason why I would move somewhere else. Not because I was like so patriotic and I'm like Serbian, but it felt much more comfortable here from a standpoint of like knowing the language, not having to go through the whole legal trouble again of having to be an immigrant and then, I don't know, get residency, get
Visas,
papers.
yeah.
Especially because, of course, I'm aware that US is probably the only country that celebrates people with different heritage and you feel sort of equal there. You don't feel like second class or like an
Well, it depends
immigrant.
where. It depends where. And also which administration.
Yeah, well, I got it through, it was still Trump's administration.
You did?
But I think
that's
it was
funny.
2020, yes. So for when I got my citizenship, I almost cried actually because I knew I was leaving, but they had this moment where I don't know how many people were in this theater, and there were 90 countries represented, and they kept going through each country, and all the people who from that country would get up and they would like cheer. It was such a celebration of everyone's heritage, while this was supposed to be about you becoming an American.
Right.
It was so amazing. I never thought I would cry at the naturalization ceremony, but I cried. And to me, I don't know another country that is close to the US when it comes to you being an American, but also being some from somewhere else. Usually they ask you to, just choose,
Exactly.
who are you now? And there's always like this, if you become a French, they're like, well, you're not exactly French, you have a passport, but you're not really French, So I realized I didn't really want to go through that thing again. At that point, I was like, if I don't have to, maybe I don't need to. And then the other part was the fact that I worked remotely and I worked with global companies, and I realized I feel good here. Why would I move somewhere else? Like I would have to start over from, ground zero.
Yeah.
I would have to look for friends. I would have to, I wouldn't have any support system anywhere. It was like some of these things I started thinking, but that only until I opened Haos and I started having a community here that I was like, I need to make a decision. I'm tired of living like in this temporary state. I want to be like, I'm staying here, even though I don't know how long, but for now I decided I'm staying forever. And I live in that mental world where I'm like, I'm living here now. That's it. So it was never a question of like actively moving here, but it just happened. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made.
It's the best of both worlds, to be honest. I mean, with Evolvo that we just started, and we're obviously at Haos, me and Marco, my CTO. I've had that. I can't really say too much of what we're doing because we're launching in September, but basically having the ability and the blessing of being here and using it as a base, but also working with people outside of the scope of the business world in Serbia, because a lot of it is tied to the state, inevitably, as with anywhere, is, I think, also from my viewpoint, the best of both worlds. And that's what I'm trying to, tell people that are still asking me to this day, why are you still here? I'm like, you're just not seeing, you have a blind spot in terms of everything that's actually happening down here. And it's refreshing to actually have someone say back to me what I think.
But it's because people have, most people don't value what they have, right? That's a common thing. So when you have, let's say a community here, and you have the aspect of people being welcoming and nice, and that, for example, they put family first here, they take that for granted, and they're like, oh, I'm going to move to the US, I'm going to keep all of this, but plus I'll get something, but which usually is not the case. You don't get just something in addition. You always have to trade it for something else. And in the US, I agree. From like let's say career perspective, if I was just starting out and I would give advice to somebody who's just starting out, I would be like, you know what, do go to the US.
Exactly.
I've already had a successful career there. I've learned a lot, and now I don't need to be there. Like, I've already learned a lot of things. I want to be connected to the US. I want to go there, but I don't need to live there. And for me, this was the choice. One of the big things for me is anxiety that I felt in the US. Actually, it's just I'm an anxious person from, like, my nature is that way. But in the US, and specifically in San Francisco, there was so much pressure all the time that your work defined you. Your you know, you're supposed to be constantly chasing something, and you don't even know what you're chasing. And all of my successful friends there were very, very depressed, and hope they don't.
Oh, they don't.
Hope they don't hear this. But no, you know, it is the truth. And here, this laid back sort of mentality, in a way where it allows me to still be ambitious, but not have as much pressure from the society on my own success. I'm like, I'm putting my own pressure, but nobody else is putting this pressure, which is sort of, I think for me, was life-changing, to be honest.
Yeah, the slow it down, take it easy permeates kind of the Serbian sphere.
Yes.
But on that note, so how do you take care of your mental health?
Poof. I mean, I think that for me, it happened sort of with age, because I've had a lot of, like, in the US, I've had several burnouts, and I'm now really good at spotting it and figuring it out. I think obviously, you know, there are things like therapy that
of course.
I think everyone should be in therapy. And that's one of the things that I think, like, in Serbia is just becoming more.
It's still
popular.
taboo to some extent, although
Yes.
it is getting more general.
Yes. But a lot of my friends, for example, are in therapy, Serbian friends. So I'm glad to see that. But there's still, like, this weird jokes about it that makes it kind of awkward. But so I think therapy. The other thing is trying to take care of myself, like, on a daily basis. So instead of trying, like, these big projects, but I try every day to think of what is at least one thing that I want to do that's just for myself and for my mental, physical health. And those two for me are connected. So I do notice that when I am super stressed, I end up always deprioritizing myself in that. So I try not to do this. I try to at least be like, okay, once a day there should be something that is about me and not work and not other people. And that could be, you know, doing sports. It could be going for a walk and things like that. So I try to do small things. So I don't have necessarily big things. One of the things that I've started recently, that all my life everyone was telling me that I need to meditate, and I was like, I cannot meditate. I hate meditation. I don't understand it. It frustrates me. When people tell me not to think about something, I'm thinking about 100 different things at the same time. I cannot switch my brain off. So meditation was something that I was, like, always saying. It's not that I was saying it was bullshit, but I was like, I hate it. And yet I really wanted to try it. And I finally found some meditations that worked for me, which they helped with my brain, where they're not telling me to shut off my brain, but they were giving me some useful information, and it calmed my mind rather than try immediately to go into, like, visualizations or, I know, some even breathing exercise and all of this. I was like, I need some useful information first, and then I can, like, think about that and switch off. And that's been now, like, it's been maybe 2 months that I'm actively doing it every day, and I feel the difference. But I hope it stays as the habit. I don't know. I can't promise.
That's great work. That was going to be my next question too. So which type do you do? Do you like do guided like Sam Harris type headspace meditations, breathing meditations, transcendental meditations? Which one did you learn first?
So I've tried a lot of, there's like, actually, I don't know all the names of the meditation. That's how new I'm to this, but I'll explain it in my own terms. So there's the ones that don't work for me are the ones where, there's this thing where they tell you like to visualize different parts of your body relaxing and whatever.
Sure.
A lot of people were sending me these types of things and they did not work for me because it was... it didn't work. A lot of, as I said, like I found a few that were actually the first ones I've tried that worked for me. And it's funny, it was Deepak Chopra's one. So somebody sent me this.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, there was like a useful lecture type thing first. And then there were some mantras. And the fact that what I think helped me is the fact that there was like a specific thing to focus on that you're saying mentally, rather than saying don't think about something or visualizing something else. So for me, it helped to be like, I'm just focused on this one thing. And I have this hyper focus in me. So it was good to be like, I'm focused just on this one word or one sentence or whatever. So I think that now it's easier for me to go on to the other ones. But in the beginning, I found it very difficult to go through these guided meditations that are like imagining yourself in the meadow and I don't know. I was like, I didn't feel anything, and I would like imagine it, and then I was like, okay, it felt sort of fake to me or something.
Yeah,
it didn't feel interesting to me.
Got it.
So yeah.
Yeah, what you're explaining is transcendental meditation, basically where you have a mantra that you keep repeating as opposed to clear your mind and just breathe. And that is funny that you say that because that was the first one I was introduced to like 6 years ago, or rather like 7 years ago in LA. And I think that California, living in California, truly, I mean, I don't know, in SF, I've only visited, not a big fan, to be quite honest, not a big fan at all. But LA has that specific, for lack of a better word, vibe where everything is permitted. In a sense of try to do it all and see what sticks and see what fits. And our CEO, which is also the current CEO of Evolve, the new company, he took us, the entire team, to a transcendental meditation kind of I wouldn't call it a shaman, but kind of a retreat in LA, and we all did it, and I fell in love with it immediately. I was like, this is incredible. I mean, I've never, you mentioned that you've tackled anxiety. I've never been of that sort, but then again, meditation just helps me ground myself in more ways than one. So, and also from your standpoint, I mean, you have so many people and you're growing your team now to a different location, relying on you, that you do need, I mean, you've been doing it now diligently for the past 2 months, but I feel like, we all need that, especially the people that actually have others who rely on them.
I mean, honestly, now when you're saying that you've never been an anxious type, I feel a lot of, I'm like jealous. Because most of the times when I talk to people, they're like, yeah, anxiety. I always feel this way. And I'm like, okay, I've now met people. I know there are people who don't feel anxiety, but I'm very jealous. I think there's a tendency, and like for people who are anxious, they're going to find a reason to be anxious.
Exactly.
So like, yes, now there's a lot of pressure, but I always think from a perspective, I've made choices that brought me here. So it's like, if you think about it, I created my own anxiety in a way. So having Haos, and I probably didn't have to. I didn't have to start Haos. I didn't have to have a second location and do all these things.
Exactly.
So it's my own self-inflicted wound. But I think why I actually started meditating, I realized that my anxiety got to a point where I started having like acid reflux, and like my body was like not doing well. And some people have like insomnia and stuff. Thankfully, I don't have that. I started having this, and meditation really helped. It's interesting. Actually, the first week I started doing it, it helped already. So I think that.
And you do like for 20 minutes?
Yes, it's like 15, 17
20,
minutes, something like that. Yeah.
So for this year, I mean, we've talked about you opening up the new space. What are your kind of goals outside of that? And are there any events that you can share with us that are going to happen throughout the year? Any conferences or something interesting that people might want to kind of partake in?
I don't know if there are anything that I can actually share. I mean, obviously we're going to have the opening end of May of the second location. There are a few things that we're doing in June. One of the things that definitely is going to happen is the women entrepreneurship. So it's a continuation of Women in Tech. We want to do about women entrepreneurship event. And obviously it's not just for women, it's for everyone, but on that topic. And you and I were talking about doing an event on
September,
mental health. Yes. Yeah. So I really hope that happens. I think that for me, I would like to figure out, there's one, obviously we're going to do the Accelerator beginning and also in September, but I would like to figure out by the end of this year, sort of the next, are we doing a next location? Mm-hmm. Are we switching it up and doing something slightly different than Haos in the current form? So there are some things I'm toying with that I keep thinking that I don't like the word coworking, and that's why I use community space. But I generally like, and this is going to sound very California, so I think all the Serbians are going to hate me for this, but I do like something that's more about the experience, so co-experiencing things together. Yeah. And I want to play with that, and I want to figure out what is next from that perspective. If you think that you have a community and they could be a global community, and you want a place for them to experience things together, and to grow together, and to sort of have that peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, things like that, what could it look like? Is there sort of something that we can change and create something that doesn't exist right now as the model and take that global? So that is sort of my personal idea for until the end of the year to figure out. Because I have some projects that are going in parallel with Haos that are not necessarily even focused, let's say, on tech, but they're for the same community, because it's like tech community doesn't care only about tech, right?
Exactly.
So that's why we talk about mental health, we talk about different things, cultural stuff. So there's some things I'm going to be doing this year that I'm like trying to tap my toe into different parts of different types of events, different types of activities for the community, where I want to maybe uncover what Haos would actually transform into by the end of the year. That's my personal goal for it.
No, I love it. I mean, I love the co-experiencing instead of co-working a lot better.
Yes.
Especially, since...
Because you lived in California.
Exactly. And I was at a WeWork, which, ended up being what it is now. Yes. So, Blanka, thank you so much for coming today. And I'm very much looking forward to all of the progress in terms of Haos Community. And whatever we can share with the people, I'll be more than welcome to.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.